Okay, so I'm sitting here thinking about this, so let's talk about it. Now, I'm in Torment 3 at the moment, and resistances and armor are actually significantly harder to get. So I have Tyrios, which gives me 60% resistance, but even with that, I had to get resistances on multiple. I mean, look, I got resistances on the ring. I got resistances on the amulet. I have double resistance on the helmet. Obviously, I have 60% here on Tyrios. I have resistances here. Don't have them on this because it's unique. I don't have them on the boots or obviously the weapon or the other unique. Okay. But I have a lot of resistances and I'm just barely over the cap. This means when I go to Torment 4, it's going to drop me below the cap too. And obviously my cap is higher because of Tyrios. But I don't have the armor cap, which is now 1,000, and I'm getting shit on in Torment 3 because of this. Now, you could just say, okay, well, the armor cap is significantly lower at 1,000, so isn't it easier? But there's two things going on. One, there is a stat squish. So we have overall stats have been squished. I mean, look at this. We have greater affix, ancestral, max life, and it's 685. Okay, 115 willpower. We have a greater affix here of 182 willpower there. If you look at here, 293 life. I mean, my life right here in Torment 3 is 4,400 to give you an idea. So there's a mega stat squish going on. On top of it, the difficulties are significantly reducing both your armor and resistance now. Now, this might strike you as annoying because you're thinking, oh, well, I had to go get my resistances and my armor, and now I'm below it again. Like when I went from Torment 2, I literally one-shot Lilith in Torment 2, like barely even breathed on her. Same thing with Durio, but as soon as I go to Torment 3, I have none of my resistances, none of my armor. There's actually a pretty big difference here, and I was getting one-shot and they were way tankier. So if you look here, for instance, Torment 2, armor is reduced by 500, resistances by 50%. Torment 3, that's another 25% across the board. You have to go on another 250 armor. And then Torment 4 is going to be 100% resistances and 1,000 armor. So I have to make up a lot of the resistances as well as the armor. Now I can make up the armor with Juggernaut, for instance, and takes one of my slots. I could go that route, which I've done before, previous to the change. But this has made me realize one thing, which is the resistance change means I have to focus more on defenses than I have to do previously. So now I'm actually having to look at resistances and think about actually adding either Tempers on resistance or actually get it as a drop on the gear. The other thing, and I can't just like throw Tyrios on and just one bang all the resistances and be fine. Maybe I still could if I get a bunch of, Masterwork rows or something like that on it. Sure, so be it. And we have to worry about the armor deduction, et cetera, with the stat squish. So we have to play a balancing game of defenses, which normally you don't really feel that much. And you can see I have armor in the rings too, and I'm still at only 530 armor. Now I could get a greater affix armor or something like that, but then we're going to be, again, taking away from one of the slots we need for resistances, etc. So I'm feeling a defensive pressure for defensive layers. That is something that feels somewhat new to me at this point when I'm progressing through the game. Normally, you get to World Tier 4 almost instantly, and then from World Tier 4 on, you just get your max resistances, your armor, and you almost never think about it again. Now what happens is you have to continually play this game of trying to get your defenses every tier you go up. And I actually like this because it is solving the puzzle of making sure that you have to deal with survivability. Something that kind of annoyed me before is I feel like I'm just min-maxing my damage. How quickly can I one-shot everything? Everything goes to damage and just have my armor and resistances, and I don't think about defenses ever again. Maybe I have 45, maybe I don't. Maybe I have some max HP. Like, who really cares? But now you actually have to play the puzzle of thinking about defenses. And there's an additional layer, which is the gear drops are a lot rarer now, okay? So the ancestral gear that you get that drops here will guarantee the drop with a greater affix, okay? But you don't get these nearly as commonly as you're progressing. So before, what would happen is in World Tier 4, you hit World Tier 4, and then everything's an ancestral, so you just have the max tier of gear. But now you pseudo are increasing how common you get the ancestral gear as you're going through the torments. So what they're basically doing is they're slowly gatekeeping you a little bit on being able to immediately solve all of the defensive layers, immediately hit all of the gear. So you actually feel a sense of progression in the gear more so than I was expecting, because you're a little bit, you could argue that they're a little bit dragging out content that we've already had in terms of the gear acquisition. But I would argue this is better for the game, because before, like I'm saying, you would hit World Tier 4, you immediately get Ancestral, but now it's like you're kind of waiting for Ancestral, you're guaranteed a greater affix, so you have a chance of it being kind of good. When you get one, you're like, oh, thank God, I still need an Ancestral helmet here, I need a ring, I need an amulet, and these will be major upgrades for me as well. But then also when you hit like a greater affix on the resistance or something like that, it actually kind of matters now, because you are actually playing this defensive layer of a game. And I'm finding myself enjoying that a lot more than I was originally expecting to, as I go through and solve, like, okay, I need the resistances, I need the armor, etc. That's actually another part of the game now that when I focus on this makes the items feel just better, even though technically my character is maybe worse in terms of power than I would be in Season 5. Like in Season 5, you're just, you have like a strength dopamine, you're just blasting through literally everything. I believe in Season 6, the struggle to stay alive might be more enjoyable than the minions struggling to stay alive, if that makes sense. Yeah, another important point is the Ancestrals are the only ones that can have 2 tempers now. So they are a significant upgrade in power as compared to the normal gear. And because normal gear now drops in world, I almost said World Tier 4, but in basically all the tiers, and the Ancestral gear just becomes more common, you're still hunting for pieces of gear. And instead of just, okay, I got an Ancestral, I got another Ancestral, everything's Ancestral, and is the greater affix good or not? Like, it feels like there's multiple layers of, I say, dopamine or item acquisition that I'm really trying to get. I'm trying to make sure I get an Ancestral drop, and I'm trying to make sure that I get a greater affix. And it might take longer for your character to actually get all of the stats you want, but the progression does feel better, like going in steps of power from 50 to 60. And 50 to 60 really doesn't take that long to get. It's basically you blast to 60. I think we're going to see very similar to D3 levels in terms of leveling progression. I heard someone say Rax got to 50 in like 15 minutes. And I was looking at the steps of experience. Like 50 to 51 is 1.5 million experience. 54 to 55 is 1.94. And then 59 to 60, I have a note here of 2.3 million experience. So we're basically talking like from 50 to 51 is not too far of a difference from 59 to 60. So the pressure isn't really on the leveling. As before, what would happen is, okay, let me level just so I can get to the world tier, then immediately max out my gear. The leveling isn't really the pressure as much as once you hit 60, you unlock the pit and the ability to go through the pit. And originally, I didn't originally like the pit. I didn't do the pit. It was annoying. It was one shot and all that. But the pit feels like a much more stable progression. I will say that Tournament 2 to 3 is a pretty big jump, and I'm assuming 3 to 4 is a pretty big jump. They were lying about that when you do it. So when you go from Tournament 2 and then suddenly you're in Tournament 3 and getting shit on, you're like, what's going on? That does make sense because of the way, like I'm explaining the resistance and all that deduction actually happens from this. So the pit is, you do actually feel a sense of progression as you go through the levels. And also, the other thing about this is the Paragon glyphs here. This is basically Diablo 3 legendary gems. Like, you just guarantee success of being able to level these. You can level these to a point of where they're usable at a much better pace. You're not locked behind this super goddamn annoying do these nightmare dungeons. This was a huge increase, in my opinion, a much better change. So I significantly like that. The Paragon board's being locked to 5. You're welcome to your own opinion on that. But now the Paragon board is basically just additional stats. This is almost like D3 again. Like, you look at, I'm just getting raw stats, right? Like, how in D3 you could just pump your primary stat. I mean, at a certain point, once you've got all of the bonuses, like I got all the intelligence bonuses I can get in this little doohickey here. So now I'm just grabbing raw stats, right? So like, we're going to have a very similar experience there in terms of the Paragon level is just raw stats. But now you actually have a sense of continuing to progress at least some part of your character outside of just hitting level 100 and immediately having all your Paragon points. Like, Paragon's actually part of the game now, because going from 200 to 300 is going to take a lot longer. Now, if you remember, I just said 59 to 60 is 2.3 million experience, okay? And if you look here at 206 going to 207, we're talking 17.4 million experience. In fact, going from Paragon 201 to 202, I have a note here of 14.5 million experience. So the experience ramps by multiple millions decently quickly. So this is going to be where your long-term account-based progression is going to come from. And then your itemization minigame of the puzzle is now a little bit more in place with your defensive layers of armor, resistances, etc. Okay, so this feels closer to me as to what I would expect from playing an ARPG in terms of items, because now I actually have to focus on both offenses and defenses. I barely ever focused on defenses. It's just resistance, armor, crank your HP, get fortify, you're done. But now you actually have this little bit of mini game to play while you're passively leveling your Paragon that gives you some passive more stats. And you can actually have some resistances from the Paragon tree matter, because now I have some additional Paragon points to play with. So maybe what I'll do is I'll take out some of these. Like maybe I feel like I don't need some of these extra ones, and I'll put them over here to grab the resistances. So if you want to play your little puzzle there of the Paragon, that feels a little bit better as well, in my personal opinion. Few other things that I noticed here is this is kind of a cool change. I don't think they mentioned during the campfire. I might have missed it, but now some of your active abilities have this like side line that goes to some of your passive abilities. So for instance, if I don't want to have to take Defiance in order to get Nature Magic Heals Me, when I take Cataclysm, it connects here. So I don't actually have to take these passives, for instance. You're going to notice these on multiple ones, like the Grizzly Rage here, and they kind of connect this way. So it doesn't gatekeep you. You know how normally you're like, okay, I have to get 1 point here just to get like unrestrained if you wanted this one for some reason. Well, now you can just straight shot through it. So this kind of lets you build a little bit more optimized in terms of what you actually want to do. If I wanted to go Rabies and just go the Toxic Claws off of Rabies, for instance, I could do that. So this is just, you can see here with the lightning, same thing. So this is just a little bit better of a quality of life way of dealing with your passives as well. Of course, there are actual new passives as well as new core skills on some of the characters. They also have changed the way Masterworking works, which is now you basically just get Masterworking. You can see from Nightmare Dungeons, Inferno Horde, and the Undercity. Now they have the Inferno Hordes disabled right now in the PTR. So because of that, what I can't do is run the Inferno Hordes to get a ton of these, so I had to try the Nightmare Dungeons. And in one Nightmare Dungeon, I'm about halfway through the one that I was starting at the beginning of this video, and I got like 50 or 60 of this Obdicide already. And now the Nightmare Dungeons are scaling based upon the Torment difficulty you're in instead of based upon the tier of the Nightmare Dungeon, for instance. So it's everything now scales off your Torment tier, which means as you're progressing through the Torment, you again have this weight on your defensives because your defensives are getting limited by each one of the tiers, meaning you have to make sure if you want to continue to push through, you have to be able to survive the tiers in order to be able to get more rewards and more of the gear that help you push further. So the progression, once again, feels pretty decent that way. Also, there is no more uber tormented, super Turbo Man mode bosses. It's just the bosses scale to whatever Torment you're in, and they scale pretty largely. Torment 2, I literally one-shot with my dogshit legacy gear, Lilith, as well as Duriel. I went to Torment 3, and I basically got one shot. So because of that, there is a significant difference in both tankiness as well as offensive capabilities, again, because they lower your resistances, etc., between the different Torments. So you no longer have to worry about collecting stones, for instance. So this is just my first impression. I'm sure some of this could be wrong, but so far, as I play through this, in the beginning of it, my experience was this feels a lot of the same, because what I was doing is going to Helltides leveling and then going through Nightmare Dungeons and leveling. I was just going from 50 to 60 to leveling. It's pretty fast. I think I leveled 50, 60 in like 2 hours, and I heard the racks did to 50 in 15 minutes. So we're talking, you're level 60 in like, 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours, all the way to maximum level doing fast strategies. I'm sure people are going to figure out how to boost each other and be even faster than that. So your leveling to 60 is no longer like leveling the max level. That's no longer really where your progression sets in. That's where the game sort of begins, and all of your progression is coming from other things. So because of that, while I was going through the leveling, I'm like, this just feels like I'm doing Helltides and Nightmare Dungeons again. But it was the after the hitting the max level that I began to enjoy the mini game of figuring out the defenses. I'm still am, because I'm trying to go from Torment 3 to Torment 4. And right about then is when I started recording this video, because I realized I'm actually having to think about defensives. And this might be like a point that it's like, well, duh, it's an ARPG. It's actually something that I never really had to do too much before. Maybe if you're pushing Pit, okay, and you got to worry about, okay, what, immortal builds going on right now, or what cheese can I use in order to make sure I take 0 damage? Maybe then, but you never really had to focus on defensives too much because bosses basically die in one hit, or you just make sure you don't have a skill issue of getting hit by all the skill shots, and that was sort of it, and everything else is just you blow through it. But as soon as I started realizing I am actually having to do a little bit of a puzzle, then the items started to feel a little bit more impactful and better. And I started to like, man, where's my next ancestral drop? I never thought that before in the previous seasons. And I'm not saying this is such a massive change that D4 is going from like a 7 out of 10 to a 12 out of 10 login. This is the best game ever made. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying the items feel better as a byproduct of the world itself, putting more meaning on the items by having a more difficulty related to the defensive progression of the difficulty tiers themselves. That is what I've been specifically noticing in my time testing this on the PTR already. So first impression, it's early. I only have about 4 hours into it at this point, and there's a lot left still to discover about the PTR. I'm live now. You are more than welcome to click the link down below to join the live stream if you would like. But that's just one thing I've been noticing so far about the PTR.